Okay, let's begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali Reza Dustar. I'm the director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on Palestinian experiences in Israeli universities. There are two very different events that motivate today's webinar. One is the publication in Arabic of the book في جوف الحوت تجارب فلسطينية في الجامعات الإسرائيلية, Inside the Leviathan, Palestinian Experiences in Israeli Universities, which was published by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute in 2022. The editors of that book and one of the principal contributors are with us today, and I will introduce them in a moment. The second event is the ongoing Israeli war on Gaza and the catastrophic destruction of educational institutions in the region. According to a recent press release by United Nations experts who form part of what is known as the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, and I quote, "With more than 80% of schools in Gaza damaged or destroyed, it may be reasonable to ask if there is an intentional effort to comprehensively destroy the Palestinian education system, an action known as scholasticide," end quote. The press release continues, and I quote again, "The term scholasticide refers to the systemic obliteration of education through the arrest, detention, or killing of teachers, students, and staff, and the destruction of educational infrastructure. After 6 months of military assault, more than 5,479 students, 261 teachers, and 95 university professors have been killed in Gaza, and over 7,819 students and 756 teachers have been injured, with numbers growing each day. At least 60% of educational facilities, including 13 public libraries, have been damaged or destroyed, and at least 625,000 students have no access to education. Isra University, the last remaining university in Gaza, was demolished by the Israeli military on January 17th of this year. That's the end of the passage that I'm quoting from the press release. I want to reiterate what this means. Every single university in Gaza has been bombed and partially or completely destroyed. Now, the book that occasions today's webinar was written before the catastrophic destruction of Gaza. In addition, what primarily motivated the book's publication was not so much to examine Palestinian experiences in Gaza or the West Bank, but to focus on Palestinians who study and teach at Israeli academic institutions. And yet I think we would be remiss not to attend to the implications for Palestinian education, scholarship, and critical thinking of this ongoing scholasticide. As the editors of Inside the Leviathan note, the book is an attempt to, quote, illuminate a complex condition facing Palestinian students and faculty fated to remain in their homeland occupied in 1948, end quote. The book attends to the possibilities for critical knowledge production under conditions of epistemic domination, as well as systematic surveillance, harassment, and persecution of students and faculty. And in so doing, I think that the book also gives us a critical vantage point to examine our own place as American students and faculty inside another Leviathan, that of American universities and their complex entanglements with American capitalism and empire. So let me now introduce our speakers. Khalid Fourani is a senior fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute and associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Tel Aviv University. Yara Saadi Ibrahim is a Polanski Academy postdoctoral fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, and Yara and Khalid are the co-editors of Inside the Leviathan. And Amir Nasser is an MA graduate in English Literature and American Studies from Tel Aviv University. He is one of the principal contributors to the book. We'd hoped to be able to host a fourth speaker, Nadra Shalhoub-Kevorkian, who is Lawrence D. Beale Chair in Law at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Global Chair in Law at Queen Mary University of London. Professor Shalhoub-Kevorkian unfortunately had to withdraw from the event as she was recently arrested and continues to face interrogation by Israeli police, most recently on May 2nd. Police searched her home, confiscated her mobile phone, laptop, and other personal items. These escalations followed decisions by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, her employer, including demanding in November that Professor Shalhoub-Kevorkian resign from her position for signing a petition, and later suspending her employment in March 2024 while denying her due process. While Hebrew University subsequently reversed its decision to suspend Professor Shalhoub-Kevorkian, her arrest and the investigations into her opinions and academic work directly followed the university's actions and threats. In a way, then, the very inability of Professor Shalhoub-Kevorkian to attend our webinar as originally planned, offers a further vantage point into what it means to conduct research and engage in critical thinking as Palestinians inside Israeli universities. I'd like to now turn to Christopher Iacovetti, who is a PhD student in religion and literature at the University of Chicago Divinity School. Christopher has graciously agreed to moderate today's event. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you, Professor Dustar. And to begin, I'd like to apologize for my voice. As many attendees are probably aware, there was a violent police raid of the encampment on the University Quad very late the night before last. And as a result, there was a multi-hour standoff with the police in which many of us lost our voices. That said, I'll do the best I can. And I'd like to begin with a question that is perhaps the broadest, but I think the most important in anchoring us in the experiential realities that we're talking about, which is simply this. What is it like to be an academic, whether a student, a professor, a researcher in an Israeli university as a Palestinian? And it would be great if the respondents could speak not only to the practical conditions that Palestinian students and faculty face in these institutions, but also to the various modes of epistemic domination that are imposed upon them in these spaces, to the disconnect between their experience as Palestinians under colonization and their scholarly production, to the colonial modes of knowledge production that they have to navigate in Israeli classrooms, things of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I can begin with answering the first question. Hopefully my answer would be sufficient. I have prepared something in advance, but then hopefully we would like to answer additional questions and in the spirit of spontaneity, and we would like this to be a conversation, not only us speaking to you text that we prepared beforehand. So I will begin with relating an anecdote. Back when we started the greenhouse project, or the critical incubator, we might be using these terms interchangeably. But back in 2019, me and my colleague Amir Marshi, who I co-wrote the essay in the book with, we would travel from Tel Aviv University. We were undergraduate students back then. We would travel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, thinking that the project itself was a great and promising avenue to nurture our critical thinking, both driven by our interest in Palestinian knowledge production. And then it became kind of ritual for us to drive every Wednesday from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem for our monthly meetings with the group. And as we drove through the landscapes, we couldn't help but notice the jarring sight of illegal settlements along the way, like Madain Elite, dotting the scenery, which underscored the system of oppression thriving around us. And I remember that we would have conversation about how these settlements seemed and looked out of place. We would have discussion about how such a system of injustice could thrive around us, and it made us feel like a sense of it's a sense of contradiction and absurdity, and even grief, which encapsulates, I would dare to say, the Palestinian experience in Israeli academia by extension. So the point of this preamble is really highlight the sense of paradox, absurdity, grief that we may feel all at once. and which others have spoken at length about. And even at universities where there are limits on the extent of our knowledge, where narratives obscure Palestinian voices. And the university where I studied, Tel Aviv University, as might be known, stands on the ruins of a Palestinian village, which is called Al-Sheikh Mwannis. Yet the university refuses to acknowledge this historical fact. And I will talk about this in a minute. Just to give you a brief historical context about the village, Al-Sheikh Mwannis village was a Palestinian village which is in the north of Tel Aviv. And in 1984, on the eve of the 30th of March, the village was besieged by Zionist and Haganah forces, and the villagers were only allowed to exit through the north of the village to places under Jordanian jurisdiction, such as Tul Karem and Nablus. And what the army, or like the Haganah forces, hoped to achieve back then, something that has become too familiar to every Palestinian throughout the 1984 Nakba, which is even also relevant up until our day, which is to drive the inhabitants of the village to despair and then eventually force them to leave their own houses and lives behind. In other words, to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian village, a tactic that is still largely used today by the Israeli occupation. And this is a term that Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pape and others have talked about and tried to reintroduce into the discourse, which is ethnic cleansing. It's about enclaving people in villages and towns and disallowing any spatial expansion of human habitats. And this became the hallmark of Israel ethnic cleansing after 1984, and it's still used today very effectively. And as I've mentioned before, the university refused to acknowledge this fact that it is built upon the ruins and remnants of a Palestinian village. And in 2003, activists from the NGO Zochrot approached the university and requested that it acknowledges the history of the village upon which the campus is built. But unsurprisingly, the university refused such a request. And as an institution of higher education, this refusal to recognize the history of the village becomes sort of a contradictory act. And what I mean by this is that the university manufactures knowledge, epistemology, and even ideology on the one hand, but it distorts, obscures, and falsifies knowledge and history of Palestine specifically on the other hand. It insists on hiding the reality and atrocity of the occupation, normalizes what is not normal, and keep intact the order of things. So studying in an Israeli academy and as a response to the questions means grappling with a suppressed history, devoid of tools to reclaim or understand it. Palestinian perspectives are glaringly absent from the curriculum, while classrooms perpetuate the Israeli narrative, erasing Palestinian experiences. Symbols of Israeli nationalism dominate, leaving Palestinian identity marginalized and voices stifled. Discrimination and microaggressions further isolate Palestinian students, denying them opportunities and resources readily available to their Israeli counterparts. Moreover, being Palestinian in an Israeli academy entails navigating complex social dynamics fraught with prejudice. It involves confronting psychological tolls in a society where existence is questioned, rights are denied, and aspirations are undermined. Yet Palestinian students persist, forming resilient communities and advocating for justice both on and off campus. This persistence is met with resistance, with conferences and academic discourse deliberately sidelining Palestinian issues. In one instance, and I remember back from my undergraduate studies, a course in international relations omitted any discussion on the Palestinian Israeli conflict, forbidding any related writing on this topic. And this arbitrary censorship seemed to me to reveal a deep-seated fear among Israeli academia to confront historical truth, opting instead to perpetuate myths and uphold power structures. These myths are further entrenched through academic theories that oversimplify complex realities, absolving the conscience of Western academia by relegating non-European narratives, particularly Palestinian ones, as backward and irrelevant. In essence, being Palestinian in an Israeli academy is a continuous negotiation of identity, belonging, and resistance. It's a reminder that education cannot be divorced from power, dynamics, and the perpetuation of narratives. Despite the challenges, Palestinian students persist, carving out spaces for their voices to be heard and advocating for a more inclusive and just academic environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to move on to the next question unless any of the other respondents would like to add something. Okay, well, building on what you had said, Amir, at the start there about this project called the Critical Greenhouse that unfolded in the space of a bit over 2 years among Palestinian graduate students, supportive faculty in Palestine. I would like to ask if any of you would be able to speak more to how this project came about, what its primary goals were, perhaps also say a little bit about the edited volume that was produced at the tail end of this project, and more generally, how this initiative serves as an example of a way that the conditions of Palestinian knowledge and knowledge production within the Israeli Leviathan can be productively addressed by Palestinians operating within the confines of Israeli academia.
Yeah, I will give a bit of context before answering your question. We need to clarify that studying in Israeli universities is the sole choice for most Palestinians living in Israel. And while there's a bulk of critical research on Israeli academia that was written about these institutions' built-in discrimination against Palestinian students, these daily experiences and processes of training and knowledge production by Palestinians within Israeli universities and colleges are rarely addressed. And also worth noting that in the last couple of decades, and as part of joining the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Israeli universities have increased the number of Palestinian students and faculty members in higher education by providing grants and developing support mechanisms. While the increase in Palestinian students' numbers comes as an opportunity, the history of these institutions, as well as the way they conduct themselves in the past half a year, unveils the conditions and agendas and the agenda of this act and the price that we Palestinians pay. So Professor Andre Mazzawi, whom we interviewed in the book, already questioned the impact of Palestinian graduates on society in the 1990s, when he unveiled the lack of Palestinian structural social mobility. However, the lack of discussion on the positioning of Palestinian researchers in Israeli universities and the training we receive is crucial for understanding the kind of consciousness these institutions hope that we students and researchers develop. So what lenses, theories, and methods do researchers bring to their social research from their training? For Palestinians, I think this is a very problematic topic. As Majid Shhadi argues for the West Bank, the university's curriculum is mainly derivative of the Western academy. And in the case of the Israeli academy, it also seeks to turn Palestinian students into captive minds in institutions that constitute part of the state machinery entrusted with tasks related to population management and surveillance, as Ahmed Saadi showed in his book, Terror Surveillance. So in the last 7 months, even more, we witnessed the brutal implementation of this aspect of Israeli universities. It does not stop in taking active part in weapons projects used by Israeli army and Hasbara efforts, but also apparent in harassments and the persecutions of lecturers who express their stance on the war, such as the case of Professor Nadira Shalhoub-Kovrikian. Moreover, disciplinary and punitive actions were taken towards over 150 students, some without due process, for expressing even the most banal views on social media regarding what's happening in Gaza. And this reality, I believe that our book serves as a reminder of the fact that this wave is not only a product of the current moment. It is not merely a reaction of the events, but rather a structural part of the Israeli educational institutions, which is implemented through different means according to the political conditions, sometimes through soft power of conditioned grants, and others through apparent limitations and punishments. And I think we can see this in the book through 3 dimensions. The first one is the historical versus the contemporary, how this structure is actually apparent since the very start of these Israeli institutions. And this is apparent especially in the first section of the book, entitled Dialogues, which contains interviews that our group's participants conducted with leading Palestinian scholars who graduated from Israeli universities, but also in the second chapter, entitled Testimonies, where Amir Nassar and Amir Marshirot, as well as 2 other students, but we also, aiming to offer a broader historical perspective, we also included 2 testimonies from past students, Professor Abdulsalam Abdelghani from the Progressive National Movement and the human rights attorney Tagrid Jahshan, then active in the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality. So both of whom reflect on students' conditions at Israeli universities during the 1970s. I think actually, not only that do these testimonies offer insights into our contemporary individual experiences, but they also begin to record the collective long-term journey of Palestinians at Israeli universities, which unfortunately has been hardly documented. The second dimension is connecting our local condition of coloniality within a broader experience of colonial settings. And we can see this in the book's final section entitled Comparisons, featuring 4 texts that attend to the experiences of academics from other racially struggling communities at other mostly Western universities. And I want to add that all of these texts were not translated before that to Arabic. And this is such an important sources for students and researchers to read. And the third dimension is what we may call the collective versus the individual level. So in the book, professors, past and current students recall multiple means for Palestinians to collectively cope with the predicaments of being Palestinian students in Israeli universities, including involvement in students' politics and activism. An additional way is initiatives by Palestinian students and some local organizations to address these predicaments through the creation of alternative spheres for Palestinian students where they can meet and share their experiences and research in Arabic. And I think the critical greenhouse is one example of these initiatives. While the collective initiatives and practices are often referred to by the students as creating a sphere that allows for agency, we can also see this in the testimonies in the book. I think that the book also shifts the focus towards the individual instances where students and lecturers find themselves in solitary research pursuits. For example, in the book, Lubaba Sabri shares the story of an ex-colleague, a postgraduate student from East Jerusalem, being asked to conduct surveys among his community to test presuppositions drawn from the Zionist agenda. This was beyond what he could take. As he emphasized, he felt he could not argue with the supervisor, an influential figure in the faculty who could easily affect his academic future. And the student found himself so pressured into fulfilling such a local informant role that he quit his studies. This is important as almost the same could be said about many Palestinian researchers associated with such projects, since they are often entrusted with assisting functions as conducting interviews, gathering data, translating from Arabic, or acting as native informants. Moreover, the conditions of research many times render the Palestinian interviewees into mere sources of information, without any reflective engagement with them as participants. And also, most of the outcomes are usually in English and in Hebrew and not translated into Arabic. Such positions and feelings it raises, especially in the process of writing a thesis under a supervision of Israeli professor, regardless of their political leaning and sympathies, go beyond the normal hierarchical academic relations between students and professors. They could be described as relations of colonizer and colonized captivity. The limitation of what is allowed is dictated in the culture and politics of the Israeli institutions and organizations within which we study and work. For example, in the book, and also Amir just mentioned that, students point out that the limitations of academic freedom are evident in the topics taught and the references included in syllabi. Even in some Palestinian professors do challenge these relations of intellectual captivity, as professors interviewed in the book argued, they pay price of preserving their professional and intellectual integrity. They can be denied promotions, sidelined, or even persecuted. In this regard, several Palestinian lecturers who were interviewed in the book have advocated the concept of the responsible or ethical researcher. You can find it specifically in the interviews with Professor Nader Shalhoub-Kovrikian and Professor Andre Mezzawi. They urge scrutinizing the conditions under which knowledge is produced, challenging the power dynamics that the structural factors produce in the research process, protecting the research subjects, clarifying the motivations and objectives of the research, and identifying the plausible benefits for the Palestinian society. Finally, I would like to note that there is a historical context to this debate, as the British mandatory authorities prevented the establishment of a Palestinian university and censored academic Palestinian publications, even while encouraging the establishment of two Zionist universities, the Hebrew University and the Technion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now that we have some background on the conditions of Palestinian knowledge production in Israeli institutions, I'd like to ask the panelists how we might extend our reflection on and critique of these conditions in the present moment, especially against the backdrop of the scholasticide and genocide unfolding now in Gaza. And I'm wondering whether and how our panelists think the task of critique and reflection itself needs to shift in response to these conditions.
Thank you, Christopher. This is, I suppose, the question that fell to my lot to answer. First, thank you, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me well? Great. First, I want to thank you, Brothers Ali Rida and Christopher, for inviting us. Normally, I would like to talk spontaneously, not from a paper, but I've prepared my answer in a note, so bear with me. But I want to thank you, first of all, for inviting us and for the privilege, really, of being with you today, especially as we approach next week. I mean, the colossal silencing of Palestine that started in 1948 and continues, actually, in the dismantling I just heard of your encampment on campus for Palestine, and ultimately, I would say, for truth and for justice. I first wish to express my admiration to you students and faculty as well for raising high the torch of truth and justice in the darkness of our world, even when it burns and God knows to hold it. As is widely known, the Islamic resistance movement in Palestine, otherwise known as Hamas, called what it unleashed last October as Al-Aqsa flood, Tufan Al-Aqsa. The key word here is flood. Regardless of what was intended by this naming, it is nearly impossible not to think of the flood story as variously narrated in the scriptures. There are 4 features that stand out in this narrative in both its biblical and Quranic iterations. I open with one of these features and will save the others for later in my answer. But in Genesis 7:15, or Brashit Perek Zayin Tetvav, those who board the ark with the prophet Noah have, we are told, the breath of life in them. Ruach Hayim, it would say in Hebrew. I see you too as having the breath of life in you. Amidst rising, roaring, and inundating oceans of lies and deceptions, maligning and manipulations, you students and faculty have bravely gone on riding the ark, taking with you the eternal, yet forever fragile pair of truth and justice, keeping them alive in a world experiencing destruction. As you ride that ark with truth and justice, please know you are keeping the breath of life for all of us amidst great swaths of wasteland, making up a good part of not only the contemporary American Republic, but the modern world beyond it. As you protest, I hope, and I say, may your breath of life extend to others throughout the world for your generation and many others to follow. This is by way of just thanking you and greeting you, students and faculty in Chicago and elsewhere in the US and beyond. I'd like now to more directly address the question about the ways in which a critique from Palestine could extend to other knowledge formations and elsewhere in the world, especially in conditions of genocide, including what has been increasingly called scholasticide. Let us start by remembering the book's main title, في جوف الحوت, Inside the Leviathan. Leviathan originally refers to a sea monster and is famously used by Hobbes to talk about sovereignty. And really, sometimes I personally think of it as whale, as hoot, and sometimes as an octopus. Be that as it may, here we use it as a metaphor for Israel and for the universities within it and for the global complex of political sovereignties. In going to a university, one is going also into the belly of a beast. Nothing prepared us before and while working on this book to recognize that what was true for Palestinian students at Israeli universities would be also so applicable and so soon to students elsewhere in the world. This book, in this sense, is turning out to be not only for Palestine, but also from Palestine to the world. In what ways is the Leviathanian condition that we explore not our lot alone, we wonder? It has been the lot of a lot more people and for a long time. And it's a condition that Gaza, perhaps the world's Achilles heel, is now revealing. The current situation in Gaza and Palestine more generally appears to me apocalyptic, but apocalyptic not in the modern sense of the word, rather in the old Greek sense of the word to mean revealing and revelatory. It reveals, the current situation in Gaza reveals processes that have been with us since the 1948 Nakba. But not only, it also reveals the instituting of British rule over Palestine in 1921, and perhaps even the 1648 Peace of Westphalia, since that is when the foundation for our modern politics and ethics were laid. The bleeding that is Gaza is an open wound that reveals a great pain, and not only Gaza's. Gaza is also perhaps a calling, nida or ibtila, I would think in Arabic. It's a calling in and from the history of our humanity. Sadness about the past and fear for the future may find an answer in this calling of the present moment. It calls us to ask a host of questions. One set of questions, for example, includes, what else in our humanity have we ignored and are still ignoring? What wrongs and injustices have we suppressed and are still suppressing from our past and present time that calls for our due attention, for our proper recognition and complete redress through the bleeding wound that is Gaza today? Think of the enslaved, the annihilated, the incinerated, the gassed, the incarcerated and the drowned, the uprooted and the starving, and the unemployed and the abused, and the quarantined and the battered and the brutalized everywhere. How might those who have historically suffered and still do these and other forms of cruelty receive a soulful and material redress, which so far we have failed to deliver in humanity's history of dehumanization, of demonizing the other? Attempting to understand the Leviathan and what it means to live inside it, our book might be suggesting that what is wrong with Israel is what is wrong with the world, but not only today, rather for at least 5 centuries now. And I say 5 rather than longer because the modern foundations of political sovereignty were laid then. Asking about the Leviathan requires us to ask whose security and whose life really matters to the state, whose security and whose life really matters to the state that claims to care for security and for life. Is it our security and life that matters, the state's citizens and subjects, or is it its own? In what ways have we comforted ourselves with the deceptive sense of safety, security, universality and sensuality, rationality, tolerance and humanity? In what ways have we as humans been doped into a false security and a flawed sense of liberty about how we think and how we act? In some sense, our book is about coming to terms with the Leviathan condition that both contains and flows from the Palestinian condition. No reminder is necessary now how vastly entangled this particular condition of repression is with a vast global historical one. It is possible that in reckoning with the Leviathan, our book calls for Gaza to emerge as a metaphor and Israel as an empirical instance. For Gaza to emerge as a metaphor and Israel as an empirical instance. Israel would just be a particular example of the global complex of sovereignty embodied in the nation state that is turning to be a Faustian bargain. A Faustian bargain that is a deal with the devil, so to speak. Fearing nature and fearing death, we fall for a stately managed life that is itself suicidal, as Nietzsche long ago has noticed. Watching from inside the belly of the beast, we wonder, could Gaza, that southern heel of Palestine, indeed be Achilles' heel of the global body of the state, military, industrial, intellectual complex? That point of weakness that brings it to its knees? We wonder. Some of the questions that impelled our project some 4 years ago in the critical incubator or the greenhouse, the critical greenhouse, is that group of graduate Palestinian students who met at the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem include the following. What is stopping us from having a Palestinian university in the lands claimed at the State of Israel? If we were to establish one, how can we ensure it to be an institution that deserves our trust and our allegiance? How can thinking and knowing, concerned with its authenticity, recognize its limits and its possibilities? What is stopping us from knowing and learning authentically today? What is stopping us from living the story we together want to live rather than inhabit stories others want to write for us and foist upon us. To the extent that our book implies acts of scholasticized, they are not ones involving tanks or jets physically demolishing academic institutions and killing staff members, as has happened in devastated Gaza. The dangers to thinking and scholarship we propose are also not limited to external powers. They also reside in the way we do scholarship today. The picture of scholasticide as an assault on scholarship that emerges in our book may just be as insidious. It runs back further in time and is far vaster than the eye can see. Especially today, when the number of professional colleges, these professional colleges in Arabic within Israeli society has grown, and when the proportion of Arab undergraduate students stands at 18%, and we're 21% of the Israeli citizenry. And when some universities, some Israeli universities, that is, offer admission materials and even preparatory classes in Arabic, it would appear rash to make claims of scholasticized. But scholasticide occurs here as well, not only under brute military rule. I wish to argue that scholasticide likely occurs whenever the conditions of possibility for thinking is assaulted. As any complex tradition, liberalism too, including the liberalism of the university, is no foreigner to killing or to annihilation, even as it calls for the quote-unquote rule of law. It is no accident that an experience like ours, the greenhouse, the critical incubator, did not take place and could not have taken place at an Israeli university. We are fortunate to have places like Mad al-Karmel in Haifa and Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, who know better than any other Israeli university how to foster a Palestinian voice. Our book is thus connected to what is known scholasticide in two ways, time-wise and space-wise. As it points to the tentacles of the Leviathan, it traces their reach in time and space. It helps us see that what we are witnessing in Gaza and around the world is something set in motion, at least in Palestine, for decades after decades, going back to British colonial rule and for centuries earlier the world over. Time-wise, let me elaborate. What we're witnessing in Gaza is an outgrowth of a long process of destruction. Let me give you an example. During the first Israeli military rule, and by first Israeli military rule, I mean the one practiced from 1948 to 1966, there was an expectation that our ancestors who remained in the homeland after its 1948 destruction would become, according to the injunction, water porters and wood hewers for those who took themselves as the lords of the land. And the emergency rules enacted by Israel's first military rule was by and large an extension of British colonial legal patrimony concerned with quashing resistance, including the Peasants' Rebellion of 1936. It is relevant to recall here that British authorities attacked Palestinian education when their official school curricula, meaning the curricula of the Palestinian schools, which were not given the autonomy, the kind of autonomy given to Jewish curricula at the time, that British official curricula favored an image of an Arab as a nomad who wandered with a weak relation to Arabic and with rootedness and without rootedness in the land's deep history. What we must still go further back in history before 1921. That is, before the dissection of the region into, quote unquote, the spheres of imperial influence and its complex of modern nationalism, nation states, dynasty states, and turn to the edifice of political sovereignty that is their condition of possibility. This remembering is necessary if we are to properly recognize that scholasticide takes other forms. The road to authentic knowledge is riddled with dangers from within scholarship, which fashions reason, with big R, following the state into an image of political sovereignty. We inherited these types of crippling notions of the individual sovereign reasoner from diverse sources, including Luther's thesis, Descartes' cogito, Hobbes' Leviathan, and even Kant's struggles of the faculties. This is as far as how we can go back in time. Let me now say something about the Leviathan and its reach spatially, space-wise. As we witness repression around the world, the repression that the US students are facing from establishment venues are an occasion to revisit the Said 1984 article, Permission to Narrate. Permission to Narrate. And by the way, in that article, Said refers to the McBride Commission, which was charged with investigating Israel's crimes in Lebanon in the early 80s, whose majority members of that commission, agreed on findings that indicate back then that Israel in Lebanon was attempting a genocide. So I wonder if that title from Said could be today updated, upgraded, and paraphrased with a new title to better reflect the dire state of students, faculty, and citizens wanting to think, as Kant might say, for themselves. Would, if Said were alive today, write Permission to Think as a sequel, or yet better, Permission to Rethink Thinking? So perhaps our book is merely an attempt, no more than an attempt, to draw our attention to the Leviathan that we all inhabit, to draw our attention to a greater danger lurking beyond, incapacitating us from telling our story. I ask this question because my sense is that part of scholasticide, again, is assaulting the very task, the very nature and mission of thinking within and outside scholarship. And when I refer to the faculty of thinking, I have in mind the faculty to discern, al-furqan, I think in Arabic, to discern, to tell truth from falsehood, ugly from beautiful, and good from bad. To reckon with the Leviathan condition would be to forge a way to a thinking that is fully open to life. And because it is fully open to life, it is also open to the reality of death, rather than Erstas cognitive securities. Our book is drawing attention to the danger assailing the very activity of thinking by the very institutions officially charged with protecting it, protecting thinking that matters for living together, for a more just world and a more loving world, and a more merciful world, for life on the planet and for the planet that can hopefully more than survive us. And speaking of survival, and by way of concluding, let's go back to the flood story with which I began. First, a reminder from the Quran itself that we must stay alert, vigilant, and steadfast against diversions from the peacefulness of our message. Those who refused to board the ark, including Noah's own kin, countered his message with obduracy, with arrogance, ridiculing and maligning those who boarded the ark. They accused Noah of madness. Let me just share with you two ayahs from the Quran. For example, those who ridiculed Noah said to him, Nuh, Nabi Nuh, قالوا أنؤمن لك واتبعك الأرذلون. That's Surah Shu'ara 111. So, shall we believe you and you have been followed by the lowest of people? And the second ayah I would bring to illustrate the condescending with which those who boarded the ark faced. It reads as follows. I'll read it in Arabic and then again translate in English. كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح فكذبوا عبدنا وقالوا مجنون وازدجر. The people of Noah faced lies, and indeed our servant Noah was called Majnun, meaning mad, insane, wasdujar, man who went even wild. Such things, such adjectives were hurled at Prophet Noah according to the Quranic narrative of the flood. But from Genesis 9:11, or Proshit Perek Tet Pasuk Tet, we learn that God strikes a new covenant with Noah and his ark riders. In Hebrew it reads, Hineni mekim et briti etchem. Therefore, I wish that you, in your protests, succeed in drafting a new covenant, a new contract, one that comes after the flood, a contract for greater justice, for greater love and greater mercy in our world and for our world. Let us hope then, as I conclude, let us hope that this new covenant, to whose drafting you have so beautifully contributed today, and without, Christopher, without losing our voice, that you've so beautifully contributed today, will spare us the end in the same warnings giving to humanity, all the way, notably, for example, echoed by St. Peter, if you wish, chapter 3:7, and by James Baldwin, the warning about the fire next time. So please draft a new contract and a new beginning for all the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The final question that I wanted to ask before turning it to the audience in some ways builds directly on that, perhaps to the extent that some of it was already covered. But I'll pose it as I had written it, in case any of the respondents would like to say more. Essentially, what I wanted to ask is, you have all by now talked extensively about the conditions of not only Israeli colonialism, but also state hegemony under which Palestinian academics operate, and about the ways that their work constitutes a critical challenge to those conditions from within a specific context, that of Israeli academia. And in this sense, projects like the Critical Greenhouse that has been described might be understood as a mode of resistance to Israeli and perhaps additionally non-Israeli hegemony in its various forms, material, political, epistemic, and so forth. All that being said, it feels important that we also attend to the ways that Palestinian knowledge production operates, not just in opposition to, but also in spite of these conditions. That is, it seems important to stress that the value and importance of Palestinian knowledge production consists not only in the way that it combats and counteracts the Leviathan's erasure of Palestinians and their history, and perhaps the erasure of all the wretched of the earth, but also to stress that it speaks to conceptual and material problems that move beyond and are not finally reducible to questions of state and colonial violence as such. So my question, broadly put, is how might we recognize Palestinian knowledge production in the form of projects like the Greenhouse as being constrained by hegemonic conditions and as constituting a vital challenge to those conditions, without at the same time treating this knowledge production as finally reducible to or merely reactive to those conditions and that colonial hegemony.
May I respond? Or maybe perhaps Amir and Yara would like to say something first.
You can go first, Khalid, and then I will add something of my own.
Yara, do you agree? Okay, so perhaps there are two ways to respond for a starter. I'm sure there are more than two ways. Where the question, Christopher, and thank you for a great question. Perhaps the first one is actually self-critical, that we turn our critical attention to the terms we use. And I specifically have in mind the term itself, knowledge production. I myself feel, is it really always a good term? What does that mean, knowledge production? Perhaps we need to be critical of the term production. Is knowledge something we produce? I have feeling there's something problematic about this term in ways beyond that I can now articulate. And that's why, if you notice in my talk, I talk about knowledge formation as a way to hint that perhaps one way to become more critical in this way and to launch a decolonizing of what comes out of Palestine is to scrutinize the very term knowledge production. How come it became so ubiquitous? And then the key word here being production, because I'm trying to interrogate the implications, the assumption it has about knowledge. Knowledge is that which is produced, if you know what I mean. But beyond that, the second way to answer your question, Palestine not being reduced to a mode of reacting to hegemony, a mode of reacting to oppression and domination and so forth, is, I wonder if one useful place of beginning would be towards breaking through that reactive mode, is to investigate, scrutinize the very division between fact and theory. How come Palestine, but not only Palestine, like any other global place in the global south, it's the place for extracting facts to test, to extend, to apply, to modulate our theories. That's perhaps one way to begin breaking through this cage of reactive knowledge from Palestine. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Khalid. I would also like to add that, and I think I might be speaking on behalf of Khalid and Diara as well, that that our approach to the project that is that we had several discussions about the need not to turn Palestine into just merely a case study, as Khalid put it a few seconds ago, not to become a topic for scholarly debates, articles, and discussions, and so forth. So we want to emphasize the need first for producing our own knowledge. We have a rich history dating all the way back to Ibn Khaldun and his introduction up to our day of rich history of critical thinking, pioneering social studies, and so on. So we wanted to emphasize that, yes, we want to produce our own knowledge that challenges Zionist discourses and hegemonies, but at the same time, we're not willing to let go of the Palestinian experience. We must keep in mind that we're talking about a people that is has a rich history, stories. This is something that we're not willing to let go of, and this is again this is something that has been in the back of our mind throughout the whole journey with the group, that we must keep it in mind. And I think also in this instance we should reflect on what critical thinking is. We should be critical of critical thinking as well. And this is maybe our attempt, our humble attempt to break through the reactive mode. We don't want to produce knowledge just for the sake of producing knowledge. No, but we want something that can benefit us and future students as well, who undergo the same experiences that all of us did and are still undergoing until this day. We want future Palestinian students to benefit and understand that we have rich history. We have many thinkers and scholars who contributed to many fields, not only in social sciences, but in others as well. So this is something that is important for us to emphasize. And again, this is as an example of a project that me and my colleague Amir Marshi again started at the university, is the Edward Said Forum, which is an independent group of students who wanted to revive the history of Palestinian thinkers, brought about marginalized thinkers, Palestinian filmmakers, artists, and something that is, of course, not dependent upon the university itself, but something that the students can contribute to. And from not only, again, this is important, not only students from social sciences, but also from different disciplines, such as medical students. And we now know how also how crucial this is to discuss all of these, how medicine, how technology is used for surveillance purposes to oppress and to oppress Palestinians. So again, like, this is something that we feel is important. I hope that I answered your question in a way.
Are we done with that question, or anything else to add? All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much to the panelists and to Christopher for moderating. We do have time for questions and answers, so if you'd like to type some questions, we can take them. I'm going to ask one myself, and it has to do with a quote in the Jadaliya piece where Yara and Khalid talk about the book. There's a passage where you say, this is pretty early on, when referring to the title of the book, Inside the Leviathan, you say that it signals the book's attempt to illuminate a complex condition facing Palestinian students and faculty fated to remain in their homeland occupied in 1948. And then you say, it is about finding a complicated, quote unquote, refuge in Israeli universities where we are swallowed into the beast's darkness, which is not singularly privative. And I want to emphasize this part, this not singularly privative part. As the prophetic tradition teaches, you go on, going into the wilderness may induce learning to ask questions anew in ways that edify the ethical dimensions of searching, researching, and thinking. And I wonder if I can ask you about one specific aspect of this, which has to do with language. So when in the book you talk about epistemic domination, the condition of epistemic domination, and today when you were speaking about various aspects of the Greenhouse Project, one significant part had to do with the lack of opportunities and perhaps even the restrictions on writing in Arabic and on sharing knowledge in Arabic. So I wonder if you could say more about the significance of language in Palestinian scholarship, but not just in the sense of the limitation, but also the possibilities. So the sort of the non-privative dimension, say, of scholarship in Hebrew, in English. Khalid quoted passages from Genesis in Hebrew, and I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about what possibilities those the opportunity to speak and to write in different languages affords the Palestinian scholar. I also wanted to note Nadra Shalhoub-Kevorkian is Armenian Palestinian, so she has she in the interview in the book she mentions that she's the descendant of families who experienced the Nakba directly, as well as the Armenian genocide. So there's also the Armenian connection in her case and Armenian communities in Palestine. So if you could speak a little bit about the question of language, of multiple audiences, and the possibilities that this really affords, maybe uniquely to Palestinians, given their positionality, that would be really nice.
Yara?
Okay. Just to start with the experience of students. So most students, Palestinian students, study in Arabic schools. So Hebrew is our second language and sometimes our third language. And usually Palestinian students enroll in Israeli universities in the age of 18, and they need to manage the whole bureaucratics, being in classes that are taught usually in Hebrew, rarely in English, but also to read articles and so on. But it's not about the language per se, it's about the metaphors. Many times also there is a lot of military associated terms used by professors in classes. But also when Arabic is used inside the campus, it is usually broken Arabic. One example is in Haifa University, where I did my first degree, there is all the translation of Arabic is not Arabic, but it's Hebrew written in Arabic letters. And I think this is just the usual or daily experience of language. But then, of course, there's no articles or books in Arabic in the syllabus, but there is also no, there's rarely Arabic authors mentioned in class or in the syllabus, so it's not like you can go and read the translation of the text that is introduced in classes. Of course, you cannot write. I mean, I think I heard of only one case, Khalid and Amir, correct me if you know more, that a lecturer allowed students to write in Arabic. So we can say that Arabic is absent completely. And, you know, the true Arabic is absent completely. And I can speak about my own experience. It was very hard to teach myself, like it was reteaching myself about my field in Arabic to try to find the terms, but not only the terms, like the sources of ideas and information that's not only taken from the Western words. And I think this is part of the, we can say, the decolonizing process that many of the professors that we interviewed in the book talked about. Many of them talked how they were taught all the years in the Israeli university in one way, and then they had to find the ways to decolonize this knowledge. And I think this is process not easy, especially for 18, 19, 20 years pupils that have many things, other things to deal with. And of course, this is part of the captive mind that these institutions try to build. But talking about opportunities, I think this is also what we are learning to be as an opportunity to find our way to connect to the Arabic word, to, as Amir talked about, the sources and scholars that we're not familiar with because of all of these years in the Israeli universities, and try to again think about Palestine not as a case study, to think about the conditions and power relations under which our research is conducted. Yeah, I think this is a kind of a daily struggle, but it's also a sphere to try to think without the censorship that we are used to when thinking in Hebrew and in English. So.
Shall I try? Thank you for this question, Alirida. Very briefly, I thought your question involves in it a number of questions, actually. When we refer to the refuge with which you opened your question, we had in mind the really sad, terribly sad and horrid state of our students, our Palestinian students coming to Israeli universities from a society that is suffering increasing rate of homicide. In my own proverbial and expert estimate, I think every third day a man, generally a young man, is killed in our Palestinian society within Israel. We no longer come from the safe villages and towns that our parents grew up in. The reasons for this are complicated to address now, but in that sense, I felt the university is a refuge up to a point, opening a window from the destruction and the dissolving of the fabric of community life. And when he said it's not singular privative, I meant that it's a complicated position in which the Palestinian student comes in order to launch her or his professional life, to launch her or his career in the world, to advance in a journey of learning. And one does learn. Let's not kid ourselves. One does learn at an Israeli university, but one learns in very specific ways, and sometimes with consequences as well, with certain consequences. So you could indeed be exposed if you want. Not always easy, but if you want, you can definitely expose to what's been called critical theory or critical thinking. You definitely can read Fanon and Derrida if you'd like, or Deleuze, if you wish, on campus, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. If you want, you can. But these same thinkers can be also used or abused for the military and state purposes of oppressing our people. That's the complicated position. I mean, you have a general in the army who was exposed to theories of Deleuze. But where does these theories go? To further subjugate people in Lebanon or elsewhere in Palestine. So it's that complicated position we're trying to capture in the book. We're open to critical thinking, but what we typically normatively call critical thinking is itself pliable and amenable to purposes of oppression and projects of oppression. To the significance of the language, man, it's an amazing question, and honestly, I don't know how to do justice to it in the few minutes we have. So all I can give is a hopeless drop in the ocean. Just think, really, just a general observation, and I wonder what Yala and Amir would think about this, is the general sense of alienation from or misunderstanding of or underappreciation of our students, Arab students, Palestinians, from their own mother tongue. So even though, for example, there are 12 million words in Arabic, in case you wondered, as opposed to 45,000 words in Hebrew, students, Palestinian students at Israel University will choose the word sifriya to talk about maktaba. They will use the Hebrew word sifriya to talk about maktaba. Or manche, which is the Hebrew word for murshid, to mean advisor. This is just one way of giving you a glimpse of the distancing, of the uprooting from one's own language, and for no lack of resources in Arabic language. That, of course, can be discussed at another time.
We have another question, actually two questions that build on this. So one from Abby Langer, who asks, how does the language we use surrounding education and the terms used within education affect the way we perceive learning? And how important is resistance against this cemented language and reforming education for Palestinians? So I think in some ways this connects back to Khaled, your point about knowledge production as a metaphor, and what different possibilities there are for thinking about learning if we think instead in terms of knowledge formation. So that's one question. And then another one is from Amir Marshi, who I'm glad has joined. And he is, Amir is the second Amir who is involved in the writing of this book. Amir Marshi says, regarding the conditions of knowledge production, it's crucial to recognize how academic institutions can limit, construct, and conscript the scholar's agency. Given the neoliberal academic environment built on individualism and competition, is it possible to produce liberatory knowledge? And then he says that Amir Nasser highlighted student-organized spaces based on collective causes and liberation. So can we consider the encampments, the quote-unquote liberated zones on U.S. academic campuses in this context as well? Does the Popular University for Gaza offer an alternative model of knowledge production? So really thinking both about vocabulary and how those limit and perhaps should be resisted, and thinking about learning, but also thinking about the specific conditions of the neoliberal university of individualism, competition, and whether it's possible in those contexts to produce liberatory knowledge, or instead should we be thinking about alternative models of organizing like the encampment?
Amir, Yara?
Yes, I can. I can answer what Amir's question, and correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I've seen and from observing the events unfolding in the US and on campuses, I think the liberated zones, they do and they can be considered. They can be considered modes of production, because I've seen that in some universities leaflets are are given to the students. There are lectures given by students or perhaps by faculty. The faculty themselves are engaged in the protest, and this for me seems to provide an alternative mode of learning and knowledge production. And the whole purpose of these encampments is to educate the students about what's going on in Palestine and in Gaza. So yeah, I think this is in some way, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel and think that it does provide an alternative model of knowledge production. And maybe Christopher can also speak to that from his own participation in the encampments at Chicago University.
Sure. I could just briefly comment on that. Say two things. One is that absolutely political education and education more broadly is an integral component of what the encampment involved here at the University of Chicago and what it involves in other university contexts. Teach-ins are an integral piece of this action. Sometimes tables where bystanders can come ask questions are also an integral piece of the action. I would also say that sometimes it can be too easy to slip into thinking about the knowledge that is transmitted by universities simply as content, almost as like data, so that it might feel easy for UChicago's administration, for example, to say, well, this is a politically neutral educational environment because there are some professors that teach one type of thing and other professors that teach other types of things. But it's becoming increasingly clear in light of the congressional and societal repression of academics and students speaking out in support of Palestine, that the kinds of people that are formed in the process of learning, in the process of educating, increasingly matters as much as the kind of content that is currently represented on syllabi does. Because academics are being, PhD students like myself, though this hasn't happened to me yet, at least, are being suspended, expelled from programs for participation in solidarity movements for Palestine. Professors are being both viciously beaten by police, suspended, placed on leave by administrators for their participation in these same things. And this creates an environment where it becomes increasingly difficult for anybody with certain types of courage and commitment going forward to make it into classrooms in the first place. So we need to think, I think, long-term as well as short-term, and we need to think both about the kinds of people that are doing educating and the kinds of people who are being increasingly prevented in advance from doing educating in the future. And so the whole atmosphere of the university is being aggressively colored a certain way to intimidate students and scholars into silence. And the more that this happens, the more dangerous it becomes for any academic who's willing to speak, as was said at the beginning, with truth and justice where Palestine is concerned, where other anti-colonial and freedom struggles are concerned, to be in a position to educate through formal channels. And so I think we need to really accent the role that these encampments are playing in forming and fortifying individuals to be well equipped to withstand those forms of repression and to educate in a truthful and just way going forward. Because the fact that, for example, and this is, I'll leave it here, the president of this university, I spent about 2 hours meeting with, along with some other students a few days ago, could not be made even off the record to acknowledge, as a matter of basic factual principle, that a single university in Gaza has been bombed in the course of this genocide. He declared that this would be a political position and so forth. The reason I bring this up is not just to insult the man, it's to emphasize the kinds of compromises that are increasingly forced upon people to arrive at those kinds of positions in the first place. That it takes a lifetime of moral and intellectual compromises to reach a point as an adult, as a university president, where you cannot acknowledge a fact that is beyond any possible dispute, except on the grounds of a political cowardice. And so political cowardice is the atmosphere being imposed by universities on students, on faculty. And going forward, we really need to think about the way that encampments like the one that has happened here are integral to resisting and staving off the cowardice that is being imposed on students or attempting to be imposed on students, so that the future of education means something, because it's not going to mean anything in a McCarthyite environment where people willing to speak truth to power never make it into a tenure review meeting.
Thank you, Christopher. Khaled, did you want to add anything, or should I go to the next one?
Sure, I can maybe begin by begin. I have three things to say, but maybe I'll say the third first. But simply to respond to Krista, the crucial things that we just heard from Chris made me think, just associatively with the diagnosis given to us by Hannah Arendt, the political thinker Hannah Arendt, who at some point was at the University of Chicago, reflecting with Günter Grass in an interview, famous interview with Günter Grass, that she was struck by how intellectuals right after 1933, she used this word in English translation, coordinated. And by coordinate, she meant the intellectual class in the Third Reich learned to adapt, and to adopt, just live comfortably with the new reality of a Nazi regime. And she was very struck by the ability of intellectuals to do so. And hence the danger that lurks to thinking that is divorced from its ethical dimensions. Thinking that matters, as I called it in my talk. To answer the question that came to us from the audience, when we link terms to education and how could new terms be part of new education, allow me to return to the issue of knowledge production. I simply brought as an example how the term that we almost commonsensically used as knowledge production itself implies a certain image of knowledge, a certain presupposition of what knowledge is. Knowledge is that which produced. And I guess one way of relearning, unlearning, visiting the process of learning is to ask, whose image is that? How come we acquired it as an image of knowledge? Where did it come from? What does it serve? When did it evolve the way it did as an image of knowledge, as that which is produced? So I bring these the series of questions just by way of illustrating how the terms we use, once we stop to ask such questions about them, they could be part of invigorating our learning in the very terms we use. As to another question, and maybe that's from the second question, maybe from Amir. Is it possible to produce liberatory knowledge? I think the encampment is an example of that, I'd like to believe, if I may say. I mean, let's bring to memory a period not long ago in our lives, the period of the epidemic, Corona. For some reason, I feel the encampment as a site of learning is a way to, an antidote to all the social damage of the epidemic, to how to come together and to learn together. And I will see even at a deeper level, it's even something more potentially transformative, is to combat the individualism of learning, which has been with us way before the epidemic. But you see how potentially the stent of coming together to learn, so learning matters in life, is in a sense an antidote to all kinds of processes we're inhabiting, have been inhabiting. I'll stop here.
Thank you. We have another question, maybe two questions that are connected. So one of them is from Daniela Tolchinsky, who says, I'm curious what the panelists have to say about the fact that a huge proportion of Israeli academic faculty, especially at Hebrew University and Tel Aviv University, were trained abroad at the US and UK universities, and it's quite difficult to get an academic job at these universities without some foreign educational experience. This seems to point to a broader problem Khaled discussed about the intricate intertwining of Zionist and Western traditions. And of course, Zionism is a Western tradition, so I wouldn't put it outside of that. I want to just add something by way of something about UChicago, which is that something a collective of us Faculty for Justice in Palestine has found in research into the university's finances is that the really deep ways that investment in companies that sustain the occupation and the apartheid and now the genocide, but also more broadly, companies that are in some ways are really reproducing the harms and heightening the harms that we're doing to the world, including fossil fuels, for instance, how deeply these are entangled with the very possibility of knowledge production at the university in a political economic sense, right? So for instance, one of the companies that is very deeply up in military investment is PIMCO, which basically funds faculty benefits, right? So the health insurance that we get, the retirement benefits, certain other benefits that we receive are being made possible by investments in military, right? So there's a in some ways it seems like to address the complicity of, say, American universities with apartheid and genocide and so on, is to target our very own possibility for knowledge production, right? It's a very paradoxical, very difficult thought to think. So I would invite you to reflect maybe on that, and also on the way that scholarship within Israeli universities depends so much on training within the U.S. The U.S. context. Really, it also gets back to, I think, the image, a really wonderful image that Yara and Khaled have of the sort of Russian doll structure of
The Matryoshka.
Leviathans, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. تفضلي يارا. I don't know if I have something no, honestly, I have to think about that question more to answer, honestly. I don't have something off the cuff.
Let me also add, as maybe as you're thinking, and this gets back to Christopher's point and Amir's point about the encampments, is as somebody who visited the encampments multiple times throughout the 8-day period and at very different times of day, what was really striking to me was not only the way that different models for learning and for discussion, for debate, for conflict resolution, because it's not all fun and games. It's not all sort of unity and uniformity within any of these camps, right? There's conflicts, and conflicts have to be negotiated and thought through. So the way that these things happen, discussion, debate, deliberation, learning, teach-ins, and all of these things, it was striking to me all the ways that the encampment as something spatially placed outside the classroom was also modeling a formation outside the university structure. How did it do that? It did it by, for instance, at the very least, I mean, in several ways. One of them was obliterating the distinction between instructor and instructed, right? So the professor and the student, in a really profound way. So, for us faculty who were going to the encampments, sort of, it kind of recalled to me the Marxian sort of dictum from Thesis on Feuerbach: the educator must be educated, right? The education of the educator. The other boundary that was being obliterated was one between university and community, the inside and the outside. Right? We had restaurant owners who came and gave speeches, and we had community organizers who were not connected to the university as students or as faculty who came in and gave speeches, and they had things to say. And it's not just, I mean, I can, as a professor, I can invite anybody to come to a class and give a guest lecture, but it was really, I think, subverting that structure of who is leading the class and who is a guest within the class, that was really profound and as an experiment, right? And not necessarily as some kind of utopian horizon, but as an experiment in thinking what other possibilities for learning and what other possibilities for knowledge can we imagine, and can we really enact, and how can they help us to push beyond some of the oppressive structures that we're both reproducing and we're entangled in and caught up in ways that are really difficult to break out of.
I would like to comment on this topic, if possible. I think that genocide and massacres in the global south committed by Western countries, or in which Western countries are involved in, many times becomes only the history or the narrative that the native communities or the marginalized communities is part of. And I'm just thinking, for example, about the case of Libya and Italy, when the genocide in Libya is part of its history, but it's not often mentioned when talking about the history of Italy. So I'm just thinking that it is, I mean, when I see the news about the protest in the campuses in the US, about the all what you were talking about, actually, for me, it is very interesting to think about it as a departing point of how can what's going on in Gaza, the genocide of Gaza, won't be only the history of Palestinians or the Israelis, but also part of the history of the US and other countries that are involved in providing weapons and in other ways in this genocide. And I think being, physically, and as you were saying, about having all these discussions and all the activism that you're doing, I think it's a very important part of, also making it part of the history of the US and not only of Palestine.
I can also add, I will try to answer the last question that I was asked about the Israeli scholars who study abroad, and then to what Professor Adirida said about the encampments. So I think that it's known that there are several programs at Tel Aviv University, in my case, where international students move temporarily to study at Israeli universities, and these usually include diplomacy and security studies, and we know the complicity between these the complicity of these institutions in I guess promoting police brutality, and even we know that some of these people studied at Israeli universities on how to handle riots and suppress riots. So it's evident that there's it goes both ways, that Israeli universities also contribute to what is going on in the US in terms of suppression of protests and riots. But at the same time, I also see the encampments, and sorry for the cliche and the corny expression, but it's a great example of putting your money where your mouth is. We've been studying and learning about all of these social thinkers and philosophers who opposed dominant modes of power, who challenged hegemonies from the 68 onwards. And look, what do you expect the student to do? It's basically the stuff that we've been studying for years. and now it's being we're seeing that put to practice. So I think that this is just perhaps ironic, but at the same time, it's also refreshing to see that the students embodying that sense of rebellion and critique, and yeah.
Any final concluding thoughts?
Just that these encampments, we wish we could have at Israeli universities for Palestinian students. I can't begin to tell you the reasons for which students are punished, suspended, investigated, expelled from campuses. So kudos to you for these creative and promising efforts. And wish them on us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you to all of you for joining us for this conversation. We know at no little risk to your own professions and to your own lives, as has been very clearly shown in the case of Professor Nadra Shahroub-Kevorkian, who again was scheduled to join us, but had to withdraw at the last minute because of the difficulties, the persecution that she's suffering at the hands of Israeli police. Hopefully next time, and thank you again, and thank you to everybody who joined us and who stayed with us.
Thank you so much, Ali Rida and Christopher, really, for all of you.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Salamat. 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 Bye.